A thin plume of smoke, then a series of metallic coughs, signals trouble before the luxury sedan even surrenders to the shoulder of the desolate highway. Inside, a man accustomed to seamless performance and immediate solutions finds himself stranded, his tailored suit suddenly incongruous against the backdrop of sun-baked asphalt and distant, indifferent fields. It's a small, almost insignificant moment in the grand scheme of his powerful life, yet it's the precise tremor that will initiate an earthquake in another's. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. For Elijah, the owner of a modest, dust-coated auto shop a few miles up the road, this breakdown will be far more than another roadside assist. He lives a life built on the integrity of his hands and the quiet hum of well-tuned engines, a world away from the polished chrome and impatient energy now idling helplessly by the roadside. His brilliance is of a different sort, unadvertised and often underestimated, hidden beneath oil-stained coveralls and a calm demeanor that has weathered its share of storms. He's seen hardship, the kind that etches lines of resilience around a man's eyes, and he's learned to expect little beyond what his own skill can earn. But what happened next would change everything. Elijah Miles had inherited his father's garage, Miles Mechanics, a small, unassuming building that smelled perpetually of oil, metal, and honest labor. It wasn't just a business, it was a legacy, a testament to a craft passed down through calloused hands. His father had taught him that an engine had a soul, a rhythm, and that a good mechanic listened to it, understood its language. Elijah possessed this gift in abundance. He could diagnose a problem by a subtle shift in vibration, a faint aberration in sound, long before any diagnostic machine could confirm it. He poured his youth into those engines, finding a solace and a certainty in their mechanical logic that the wider world often denied him. Prejudice had been a quiet, persistent shadow throughout his life. The reason, perhaps, he preferred the company of machines that judged him only by his skill. He'd seen opportunities sidestep him, heard the subtle condescension in voices, felt the sting of being overlooked. Yet, he met it all with a steadfast dignity, focusing on his work, on providing for his younger sister, Maya. She was his anchor, his quiet motivation, a bright spark studying to be a teacher, her tuition paid week by week from the earnings of his shop. The antagonist in Elijah's life wasn't a singular person, but the grinding pressure of making ends meet, the systemic disregard for quiet talent when it didn't wear the expected attire or come from the expected places. It was the unspoken assumption that a black man in coveralls, running a small rural shop, was somehow less than. This force had manifested in countless small ways, like the well-dressed man in the expensive, broken-down sedan who now sat fuming, his impatience a palpable wave. The man, Mr. Arthur Sterling, exuded an aura of command, his gaze sharp, his gestures clipped. He was a figure from a different universe, one where time was a commodity he couldn't afford to waste. His initial assessment of Elijah, who had pulled up in his old but reliable tow truck, was likely colored by these ingrained assumptions. Just another local mechanic, probably slow, hopefully not too expensive. The setting of the encounter was stark in its contrasts, the sleek, disabled European car against the dusty, sun-bleached shoulder of Highway 17. Sterling's expensive leather shoes on the gritty tarmac. Elijah's worn work boots, steady and sure. Elijah, however, rarely wasted energy on what others thought. He saw an engine in distress, and his instinct was to heal it. He'd always believed that good work spoke for itself, a philosophy that had brought him respect among those who knew him, but little in the way of broader recognition or financial security. His potential, vast and meticulously honed, remained largely a secret kept between him and the machines he understood so intimately. The catalyst, when it arrived, was wrapped in the mundane guise of that roadside breakdown. Elijah had spotted the disabled vehicle from his shop, a dark silhouette against the shimmering heat haze. He grabbed his essential tools, a familiar weight in his hands, and drove out. He didn't think about payment or who the driver might be. He saw a problem he could solve. Upon arrival, Mr. Sterling was already on his phone, his voice tight with irritation as he spoke to someone about rerouting a private flight. He barely glanced at Elijah. "Can you fix it? How long will it take? I have an extremely important meeting." The questions were rapid fire, almost an interrogation. Elijah simply nodded, his gaze already focused on the car. "Let me take a look," he said, his voice calm, a counterpoint to Sterling's agitated energy. This was the unspoken link to Elijah's past, to every time his competence had been doubted until proven. He felt the familiar flicker of being underestimated, but it no longer stung. It merely settled into a quiet resolve. He popped the hood, and the world outside the engine bay seemed to fall away. His hands moved with an innate grace, checking connections, listening, feeling. Sterling, initially pacing and muttering, found his attention drawn to the mechanic's focused intensity. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It was clear this wasn't just a job for Elijah, it was a craft. After a few minutes, Elijah identified a faulty sensor, a small but critical component. He had a spare back at the shop. Fuel sensor malfunction. I have one. Should take about 30 minutes once I get back, Elijah stated, wiping a smear of grease from his knuckle. Sterling looked surprised. That's it. The last guy who worked on this charged me a fortune for a full diagnostic and couldn't find a thing. Elijah merely shrugged. Sometimes it's the simple things. The subtle test of his ability had been passed, not with boasts, but with quiet, efficient action. When the repair was done, the powerful engine purring smoothly once more, Sterling pulled out a thick wallet. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, a note of grudging respect in his voice. Elijah shook his head. "No charge." Sterling paused, genuinely taken aback. "No charge? That's unusual." Elijah met his gaze. "You were stranded. Glad I could help. Just pay it forward sometime." He offered a hand. Sterling, after a moment's hesitation, shook it firmly. "Elijah Miles," the mechanic said. "Arthur Sterling," the businessman replied. They parted ways, Sterling speeding off towards his delayed schedule, Elijah returning to the familiar rhythm of his shop. The incident, he thought, was over. But the next morning, as the sun climbed over the dew-kissed fields, a deep, unfamiliar roar began to fill the air. It grew louder, thrumming through the floorboards of Elijah's small workshop, rattling the tools on the walls. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked up. Descending from the sky, with an almost surreal grace, was a private jet, its sleek fuselage gleaming in the morning light. It touched down in the large, empty field adjacent to his property, a place usually reserved for grazing cattle. Elijah stood, rooted to the spot, dust from his coveralls swirling faintly as the jet's engines powered down. The access door opened, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the bright sky. It was Arthur Sterling. Sterling walked across the field, his expensive shoes now navigating uneven pasture land, a stark contrast to the previous day's encounter on the smooth asphalt. He carried no briefcase, no air of impatience. Instead, there was a thoughtful, almost contemplative expression on his face. Elijah watched him approach, a mixture of disbelief and apprehension churning within him. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. "Mr. Miles," Sterling began, his voice carrying easily in the quiet morning air, "I hope I'm not interrupting your work too drastically." Elijah, still trying to process the sight of a private jet in his neighbor's field, managed a slow shake of his head. "Mr. Sterling, this is unexpected." Sterling smiled faintly. "I imagine it is. Yesterday, you did something quite remarkable. It wasn't just that you fixed my car, efficiently and correctly, when others had failed. It was how you did it. And why?" He paused, looking around at the humble workshop, then back at Elijah. "You refused payment. You asked for nothing in return. In my world, Mr. Miles, that kind of integrity is a rare commodity. Rarer than a perfectly functioning fuel sensor, it seems." Elijah felt a flush of warmth rise to his cheeks. He wasn't used to such direct praise, especially from someone of Sterling's apparent stature. "I just did what felt right," he said, the words simple, honest. Sterling nodded. "I believe you. And that's why I came back. I don't just invest in businesses, Mr. Miles. I invest in people. People with talent, people with integrity. People like you." Elijah's mind raced. Invest? What could a man like Arthur Sterling possibly want to invest in, here, in his small, struggling garage? A seed of his old wariness, born from years of being overlooked, tried to sprout. Was this some kind of elaborate trick? A misunderstanding? He thought of Maya, of the constant juggle to keep her tuition paid, of the dreams he'd long deferred for himself, to expand the shop, to maybe even design some of the specialized tools he'd always imagined. "I'm a mechanic, Mr. Sterling," Elijah said, his voice steady, though his heart was hammering. "I fix cars." Sterling's gaze was direct. "You're much more than that, Mr. Miles. You're an artist with engines. And you're an honest man. I spent last night thinking about our encounter, about the waste of talent I see all around, people with immense capabilities who never get a fair chance because they don't fit a certain mold or don't know the right people." The personal stakes suddenly felt immense. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the validation of his life's work, his father's legacy. It was about Maya's future, a future he could potentially secure beyond his wildest dreams. Sterling continued, I looked you up, Mr. Miles. Your shop, the quiet reputation you have for quality work, for fairness. It all aligned with what I saw yesterday. This was the face-to-face moment, not of antagonism, but of a daunting, almost terrifying opportunity. Sterling's wealth and power were not a threat, but they represented a world so far removed from Elijah's own that it was difficult to grasp. Elijah felt a dip in his own resolve, a wave of self-doubt. Who was he to attract the attention of someone like Arthur Sterling? He remembered past failures, past dismissals, moments when his race had been an unspoken barrier. A quick, vivid image of a loan officer years ago, politely but firmly denying him capital for a small expansion, flashed through his mind. Why me? Elijah asked, the question raw with a lifetime of quiet endurance. Sterling's expression softened. Because you didn't ask, why me, when you saw me stranded? You just helped. Because your skill is undeniable. And because, frankly, I believe in giving talent a runway. What you have here, he gestured to the modest shop, is a strong foundation. But I think you could build something much, much bigger. The game-changer reveal came when Sterling laid out his proposition, not as a handout, but as a partnership. I want to fund a state-of-the-art automotive research and repair facility, Mr. Miles. Right here, if you like. Or wherever you choose. You would design it. You would run it. You would have access to the best equipment, the best technicians you want to train. We could even fund some of those design ideas you might have for specialized tools, for engine improvements. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. This wasn't just a lifeline, it was a rocket ship. The evidence of Sterling's sincerity was parked in the adjacent field, its engines cooling, a massive, undeniable testament to his capacity to make things happen. There was no explicit deadline, no high-pressure countdown from Sterling, but Elijah felt an internal one. It was the ticking clock of his own life, the years of toiling in relative obscurity, the dreams he had almost allowed to fade. This was a chance to reclaim them, to amplify his skills on a scale he'd never dared to imagine. He needed to talk to Maya. She was his sounding board, his clearest mirror. That evening, he laid it all out for her, his voice tinged with a wonder he couldn't quite suppress. Maya, ever practical but deeply proud of her brother, listened intently. Elijah, she said, her eyes shining, Dad would be so proud. This is everything he believed about you, about your talent. The risk isn't in saying yes, brother. The risk is in letting this pass you by because it's bigger than what you're used to. Her words, full of faith, helped solidify his resolve. He thought about the technical challenges, the responsibility, the sheer scale of it. But beneath the apprehension, a current of excitement, strong and true, began to flow. This was more than an opportunity, it was a validation. The next morning, Elijah called Mr. Sterling. His decision was made. They arranged to meet back at the shop, the place where it had all begun, where the quiet dignity of Elijah's labor had first caught Sterling's discerning eye. The atmosphere in the small workshop was charged with a sense of impending transformation. The familiar scent of oil and metal seemed to mingle with the fresher, sharper scent of possibility. Sterling arrived, not by jet this time, but in a sensible rental car, a subtle acknowledgement of the grounded nature of their new venture. Elijah stood before him, no longer just the roadside mechanic, but a man on the cusp of realizing his full potential. He felt a tremor of his old fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of failing on such a grand stage. But he looked at his hands, calloused and capable, the hands that had diagnosed and healed countless engines, and a sense of profound clarity settled over him. Mr. Sterling, Elijah began, his voice calm but firm. I've thought about your offer. About what it would mean. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I spent my life working with engines, understanding them, respecting them. This opportunity, it's more than I ever expected. He looked Sterling directly in the eye. I accept. I'm ready to build this with you. There was no groveling, no excessive gratitude, just the quiet assertion of a man who knew his worth and was ready to prove it on a larger scale. Sterling's smile was genuine. I had no doubt, Elijah. Your questions will be about how, not if. That's the mark of a true builder. This was the triumph, not of conquering an enemy, but of conquering his own limitations, his own learned hesitancy. The sacrifice was the familiar comfort of his small world, but the gain was immeasurable, the chance to make a lasting impact, to create, to innovate. The decisive turning point came with a simple handshake, a gesture that sealed not just a business deal, but a partnership built on mutual respect, and a shared belief in the power of integrity and skill. Sterling was affirmed in his unconventional investment strategy. Elijah was affirmed in his intrinsic value, a value that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment, the right pair of eyes, to see it. In the immediate aftermath of their agreement, a profound sense of peace settled over Elijah. He walked Sterling to his car, the earlier tension replaced by a quiet, shared excitement. As Sterling drove away, Elijah leaned against the doorframe of his old shop, the thrum of the private jet now a memory, replaced by the hum of his own revitalized dreams. He pulled out his phone and called Maya. Her joyous cry on the other end was a melody. Later, Sterling mentioned in a follow-up call his intention to create a foundation that would seek out and support Elijah's talented individuals overlooked by conventional systems, a quiet nod to a systemic change he hoped to foster. Elijah was given complete agency in the design and planning of the new facility. Sterling made it clear this was Elijah's vision to execute, with his resources to back it. The weight of past slights, the quiet sting of being undervalued, began to lift, replaced by a hopeful, grounded anticipation for the work ahead. A few weeks later, surveying the cleared ground where the new state-of-the-art Miles Automotive Innovation Center would soon stand, Elijah felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was still in his familiar coveralls, but they felt different now, imbued with a new purpose. Maya stood beside him, her arm linked through his, her own future as a teacher now secure, her pride in her brother radiating like sunshine. Elijah looked down at his hands, the same hands that had so carefully and selflessly repaired Arthur Sterling's car. They were ready, he knew, to build something that would last, something that would echo his father's belief in honest work and quiet genius. It was a new beginning, earned not through ambition, but through an act of simple, unrewarded kindness that had, against all odds, changed everything. This story celebrates the power of unseen brilliance and the profound impact of integrity. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.